Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7 with me, Sam Paton. And this evening I am joined by the fabulous Siobhan Tolland. Hi Siobhan, how are you doing?
Not too bad. It's Friday, so all good. How are you?
I'm doing grand. Again, it's Friday, so it's good. Yep.
Indeed.
And we'll start with tonight's news, starting with the coronavirus update. As of 2 p.m. today, a total of 1,853,471 people in Scotland have tested through the NHS Scotland labs and the UK Government regional testing centres since the start of the pandemic. Of these, 1,632,040 people have been confirmed as negative. 221,431 have tested positive. There have been 285 new confirmed cases of COVID-19. Not everyone with the virus will display symptoms, and not all those with symptoms will be tested. There were 6 new reported deaths of people who have tested positive. The number of patients in Scotland who have died from complications caused by the coronavirus COVID-19 infection now stands at 7,626. This number only includes those who have died having received a positive test for the virus in the previous 28 days. Of the people who have tested positive, 168 were in hospital last night, 20 of whom were in intensive care. As of 8 a.m. today, 2,625,577 people have received their first dose of the COVID-19 vaccination, and 524,812 have received their second dose. The latest UK daily figures show that 127,040 patients who have tested positive for COVID-19 have sadly died from their illness, an increase of 60 since yesterday. This number refers to deaths in all settings and not just hospitals, and our condolences with all the family and loved ones who have lost somebody due to COVID-19. And for our next story, Prince Philip dies aged 99. Buckingham Palace has today confirmed the death of His Royal Highness Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, at the age of 99. The First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, has sent a message of condolence to Her Majesty the Queen following the announcement. Flags will be flying half-mast on the Scottish Government buildings, and online books of condolence are due to open, and we're going to play the First Minister's statement just now.
Well, I'm deeply saddened by the news that the Duke of Edinburgh has died, and my deepest personal condolences go to Her Majesty the Queen and the entire royal family. First and foremost, he was a husband, a father, a grandfather, a great-grandfather, and my thoughts are with all of those today who will be feeling a profound sense of loss and grief. In particular, the Queen. He was her husband of 74 years, and I think we can all imagine just how devastated she will be at his loss. Prince Philip, though, he lived a life of public service and deep devotion to the Queen. He had a close association, of course, with Scotland. He went to school in Scotland. I know that he enjoyed all of the time he spent at Balmoral. He had a very long association as Chancellor with the University of Edinburgh. But probably above all of that, the Duke of Edinburgh Awards scheme transformed the lives and gave hope and inspiration to countless numbers of young people. So I think we should deeply appreciate the massive contribution that he made to public life and to the whole country.
And here in Scotland, the election campaigning has been cancelled following the announcement of the death of Prince Philip. Campaigning for the up-and-coming Holyrood election has been suspended today until further notice. Parties are expected to give notice of when their campaigns will resume over the weekend. And also, the presiding officer at the Scottish Parliament has agreed to recall Parliament for a motion of condolence following the death of His Royal Highness the Duke of Edinburgh at 11 a.m. on Monday. And on to our next story. Siobhan, we're going to be, sorry, I was going to jump on to the next story there, and then I remembered I've got a guest this evening.
You remembered there's somebody else here, aye?
Yeah, I've remembered somebody else is here. The campaign's now been cancelled due to, out of respect to the royal family, and I know people in Scotland have got mixed feelings about this, but I think under the circumstances, just to suspend campaigning. But the Parliament being recalled on Monday, do you think that's out of respect, or do you think maybe we shouldn't be going quite that far in Scotland? Or I don't know, that's a kind of difficult one up here because people have got such different views in regarding the royal family in Scotland.
I think we do, and as an anti-royalist myself, there's we should all mourn the death of a man, and a grandfather and a father, and so on and so forth. I think it does feel maybe slightly out of touch from Scotland. I'm torn, honestly, because I'm torn between almost the political answer and the personal answer, if that makes sense. I'm torn. We might not necessarily as a nation. We might not necessarily as a nation be pro-royal, but maybe there is an element of just good manners because we're neighbours and mourning,
Yeah.
So there's maybe a wee element of that there.
It's a difficult one, and as somebody that's it's never been a fan of the royal family, it's difficult, but then again, we need to remember it's someone's father, grandfather, husband. We might not agree politically what they stand for. And at this moment in time, there's been a lot of us have lost loved ones, especially in the last year, and I think it's just been mindful and just been a bit respectful at the moment. And I think I think we'll move on because it's a tough one, isn't it? And you don't wish any ill feeling on any family or anybody, regardless.
Maybe the respectful way dealing with this on an individual and societal level is use that time where Parliament are mourning or formally expressing mourning for Prince Philip, is that we all mourn the death of people that we've lost over the last year for COVID, and be mindful that everybody's lost someone, as you said.
And I think that's more of a sympathetic way and respectful way, because definitely. Now to move on to the next story. Northern Irish loyalists demand changes to Brexit border arrangements. In Northern Ireland today, pro-British loyalist militants said there had been a spectacular collective failure to understand their fears and anger over Brexit and other issues as police braced for more street clashes following a week of riots. New border arrangements with the EU member Ireland must be renegotiated, the Loyalist Communities Council said in a statement. Despite appeals for calm from London, Dublin and Washington, the nightly unrest in unionist pro-British areas spread further into Irish Republican parts of Belfast yesterday, where police responded to attacks with water cannon. 19 officers and a police dog were injured, as police said. The clashes are some of the worst violence in Northern Ireland in years and have raised concerns about the 1998 peace accord that brought to an end 3 decades of sectarian and political bloodshed, during which 3,600 people were killed. The LCC, the Loyalist Communities Council, which says it speaks for the Ulster Volunteer Force, Red Hand Commando and Ulster Defence Association militant groups, denied it was involved in the riots and called for calm. The Loyalist paramilitaries had laid down their weapons in the years that followed the Good Friday Agreement, but the LCC said unionist anger had been misunderstood. Boris Johnson had promised there would be no hard border between Ireland and Northern Ireland as a result of Brexit. The unfettered trade between the province and the rest of the UK would continue. Sinn Féin leader Mary Lou MacDonald says she feared the protests could set the tone for a violent summer when thousands of pro-British Protestants hold matches, a tradition many Catholic nationalists who want to be part of a united Ireland seen as provocative and often lead to clashes. The United States, which has traditionally taken a close interest in Irish matters, on Thursday warned that the Good Friday Agreement, which helped broker, should not become a casualty of Brexit. Siobhan, I don't know if you've been, well, I imagine you have been keeping an eye on this, like everybody else. We kind of seen this popping up on social media before the mainstream media even mentioned what was going on over in Northern Ireland, which was, it was as if they were trying to ignore what was happening. I don't know how you feel about this, but one of the most prominent things that I've seen over the last couple of days was Matt Hancock basically saying that the violence was a devolved issue, and it was as if they were washing their hands of what was happening, when really Westminster have got a huge part in this. What's your feelings on what's going on over there at the moment in Northern Ireland?
I mean, do you remember that quite famous scene when David Cameron, after Brexit, basically came out, resigned, and walked off, and dumpty dum, as if it was nothing. So he set the tinder,
Yes.
he lit the problems, and he walked away with no responsibility. And to me, that is utterly symbolic of what's now happening in Northern Ireland. A devolved issue. I mean, seriously, are you kidding me? All of this lays on the doorstep of Westminster. This is, and what's tragic about this really is the fact that we knew that this was going to happen. We'd been warning Westminster since Brexit, the Brexit vote happened. Civil liberties charities and organisations in Northern Ireland had been warning similar. This could break the Good Friday Agreement. This risks peace within Northern Ireland. The Brexit arrangement is massively problematic for Northern Ireland. Yes, of course, there's hardly any media coverage of this, because this is just sweeping the problems under the carpet, isn't it? It's that kind of, right, we've lit the fire, we've started the problems, and we're just going to walk away and pretend it's none of our responsibility. Who would have guessed, that this was going to happen? And it is concerning. And as Sinn Féin said, this is a problem because it does set the tone over the summer as well. And what we've got is, even if you remember the kind of after the the Rangers football match, and there was the gathering in George Square, and there wasn't any violence, but there was that fear that it could be violent, and there's that element there now in Northern Ireland that they're now walking on eggshells. This is a nation who voted against Brexit. They voted to remain in the European Union, so and this constant running roughshod over what Northern Ireland wanted and pretending that everything was going to be okay. Well, it's clearly not. And the Good Friday Agreement is now massively at risk. After all those years, decades of everyone being mindful and everyone working really hard on an individual and societal level to sustain and maintain peace in Northern Ireland, and then Brexit comes, and it's just so symptomatic of Westminster. I've been saying all along that if Westminster can risk peace in Northern Ireland, which they knew fine well they were doing, and it shows you, I think, the utter irresponsibility, I think, of Westminster. I felt for Northern Ireland since the Brexit vote, because for other countries, it's difficult, but peace was always at risk in Northern Ireland, and that is an incredibly scary time. And it's just so tragic because it's so avoidable, or it was so avoidable. I think maybe we've passed that point now. I'm really quite gutted for Northern Ireland. I'm gutted for everyone that lives in that nation that now are sitting on tenterhooks going, what's going to happen now?
Yeah, I get the feeling, Siobhan, because the thing is with Northern Ireland, it's very much that Westminster has forgotten,
Yeah.
the whole history. It's like they've gambled the peace process in Northern Ireland, and they have got it wrong. They have took a huge gamble based on Brexit, and they have got it wrong. And what's happened is it's the youngsters you see out in the streets, and it's creating this new generation. I hope not. I don't know if you're seeing it the way I'm seeing it, where it looks as if it's creating a new generation of violence that, if left unchecked, could grow.
And that's the concern, isn't it? That is the concern. I mean, I would go more critical of Westminster and say that it wasn't that they got it wrong, it was actually that they didn't care. They actually didn't care. They were so focused on a kind of a jingoistic, nationalistic type Brexit, that they actually didn't care about the consequences. And we are, like you say, I mean, we don't know what's going to happen. Hopefully we'll find a resolution, and hopefully the people in Northern Ireland will come together again and find a resolution. Probably without the help of Westminster, because for probably best they stay out of that kind of thing. But that is the risk now, isn't it? That we have another generation of people being experiencing and having direct consequences of the violence through. We don't know what's going to happen. I think that's what's scary, isn't it? We don't know how this is going to explode again, and if it does, and yeah. I can imagine it must feel an unsafe place now.
Yeah, and I hope everybody in Northern Ireland is staying safe, and I hope that they get a resolution. But I know that Joe Biden has also made his point, and hoping that they get a solution as well. But yeah, but
and internationally, I suppose we're lucky. Oh, sorry, Sam.
No, on you go. Siobhan.
Just thinking that, I mean, internationally, perhaps we are lucky that we've got Biden now rather than Donald Trump, because that, I mean, at least at least Biden has the kind of statesmanship, the kind of negotiation skills, and the care and concern, I think, to maybe try and find a positive resolution, or help find a positive resolution in this in an international sense, whereas Donald Trump would have done Westminster, but were stomped all over it with these big, clunky, selfish feet,
I think that's the difference between people who are adult and know how to adult, and people who give it the selfish, temper tantrum, childish way of leading the country, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right, we're going to move on to the next story in the UK. UK allows the ousted Myanmar ambassador to stay on. The UK will allow Myanmar's ousted ambassador to stay on while he decides his future after being locked out of his own embassy, it said on Friday. The statement from the Foreign Office said that they condemned the way the Myanmar military in London barred their ambassador from entering the embassy yesterday evening, and paid tribute to the courage of Kwa Zar Ming in standing up for the people of Myanmar. Pointing to the bullying behaviour towards Mr Ming, the statement said that the UK government are seeking to ensure he can live safely in the United Kingdom while he decides his long-term future. Siobhan, this is one of those ones where the UK government are actually standing by somebody and seem to be helping, which is shock horror, unusual in terms of the Foreign Office, but then again, he is an ambassador. But this is just something that you wouldn't expect to see in this day and age, as an ambassador being locked out of his embassy. What do you make of what's going on?
I mean, I have to confess, my knowledge of it is pretty poor. So, take what I'm saying with very little background knowledge. But from what I'm understanding is that, you know, I mean, the government who were voted in, and you know, and then a military coup. Democracy is so fragile, isn't it? And I think I've said this quite a lot of times in lots of different scenarios now, that we do seem to be having situations, not, you know, across the globe where it's beginning to erode. And it seems like to me quite a blatant undermining of the democratic process there as well. But it's also a situation where I think that we should remind ourselves that it's also very fragile here too. And we, you know, it's not a case where we look on and go, well, that's happening across there, because we just need to look at what happened in America relatively recently and the precariousness of democracy there too. So it's maybe a kind of a reminder for ourselves. But it's locked out your embassy. That you know, it can't be much fun. and that of course means that there's issues going back, and it's basically locked out his homeland, isn't it? So
yeah, that's the thing. That's him then. You know, he's probably exiled from his homeland and, you know, separated from his family as well. And yes, it kind of reminds us that democracy is fragile, and from people who are determined to undermine democracy. And and we see it happening everywhere right now.
it's
you're
not
right,
a solid
it's a wee reminder.
Once it's, I mean, it's not a solid
reminder.
thing. We think that maybe sometimes because it's established, or we've established it at one point in history, then that's it there forever. But it's so, you know, it's so easily crumbling away or so easily undermined. And that goes for all our rights as well, our human rights, and as well as our democratic rights. It's all part of a kind of very fragile process where we constantly have to make sure it's not being taken away from us. I think we experience that quite a lot now within the UK as well, especially being part of a nation who wants independence, you know, being told constantly that we can't get what we want.
Yeah, and also as well, getting the government we don't vote for. That's another indication of democracy being undermined as well.
For sure, yeah.
Definitely.
And it's amazing how quickly it's normalised, though, you know?
Yeah, and it's normalised. I mean, throughout the UK and throughout the world, you know, people accept that, you know, a country is not getting the government they are voting for. And you know, but you wonder if the international community, do you think the international community is going to step into Myanmar, or do you think they're going to just kind of step back at the moment and wait and see what happens?
It's a difficult one, isn't it? Because, you know, if you look at kind of some recent events, and, you know, then it's organisations are reluctant to step in, and they maybe should be stepping in more often than not. But it's a difficult one because there's that complex history of, you know, countries stepping in on a pretext of anti-democratic processes, but you know, countries like Iraq and stuff being invaded was on the pretext of the democracy was at risk. So you've got to. It's a very I think it's a very difficult moral question a lot of the times, because we can sometimes, especially coming from a history of empire as the UK and the US do, is that we're all just too quick off the foot to start, you know, going into other countries on the pretext of various different excuses. So it is a difficult one, and it's trying to find that balance between what's a justified support structure and what's just an invasion, if that makes sense. So, you know, there's that kind of weird one for me, but this is a coup, and I think we probably need to kind of support you know, the government in waiting, as you will. Whether the international community will do that is maybe, there's lots of cases across the globe where the international community has not stepped in when it's been pretty obvious that there's grievous anti-democratic processes working.
Do you think that's got more to do with what, in terms of what the international community can gain themselves in terms of trade, and
I know,
you know, or do you think it's more to do with, you know, trying not to step and get involved in so-called other countries' troubles, because sometimes it does look as if it's more to do with what they think they can gain when they step in. They make these choices to step in and coups and things like that. Or what's your thoughts on that one?
It's all empires trying to carve up the globe, isn't it? That's kind of what it looks like. I mean, even the kind of problems between Russia and the US and stuff, it's all about land and resources, and oil is one of the big ones. And that has been quite a big one. It's usually when things like that happen in America or the UK start talking about wanting to move into an area, you think, okay, what's the resources? What are they looking for? Am I being just cynical? I don't think I am. It's an empire, grab the resources and go. And oil is an increasingly shortened resource. So we do have that kind of problem.
Yeah, and it seems to be a problem that's been centuries old, isn't it? Where they're trying to pilfer the resources.
Yeah, from the Crusades onwards.
Yeah. Right, on to our next story. The US sent 2 warships to the Black Sea. The United States will send 2 warships to the Black Sea next week, Turkey announced today, as Russia, which has beefed up its military forces near Ukraine, accused non-coastal NATO powers of increasing naval activity in the region. Washington says Russia has amassed more troops in Ukraine's eastern border than at any time since 2014, when it annexed Crimea from Ukraine and backed pro-Russian militias in the eastern Donbas region of Ukraine. Violence has flared between Ukrainian troops and the pro-Russia militias, spurring fears of a major escalation. Russian President Vladimir Putin accused the Ukraine of dangerous provocative actions in the Donbas region during a telephone conversation with Turkey's President Tayyip Erdogan. Turkey, a NATO member, said the United States would deploy 2 warships to the Black Sea from April the 14th to 15th. Siobhan, again, this is, what we've just been talking about, America sending in the troops, and getting involved, and another country or another 2 countries' affairs. Between Turkey and Russia regarding Crimea, and I'm not very good with it when it comes to the kind of Russian conflicts and things with Putin, but just knowing what I know about Putin is very much, again, it's like it's just take, and again it's this undermining of democracy, and if he wants it, he goes in and takes it. Do you think this is going to actually solve America getting involved, or do you think there should be a kind of, I don't know what the answer is. Do you think America should be getting involved regarding Russia, or do you think it's going to just kind of kickstart something else with America getting involved?
Yeah, it's there's 2 empires clashing there a bit, isn't there? And it strikes me as a wee bit of political posturing. And of course Erdogan and Turkey as well is hardly the leading light of democratic and enlightened thinking either, for that matter. So you are talking about your quite complex kind of dictatorial figures, kind of fighting over land and resources, it looks like. Russia seems to want to fight with everybody these days. It's like
it just seems to be going on everywhere, doesn't it? It just seems to be around the world. Everybody's all bickering about whose resources, whose land, whose water.
Yeah, it makes me realise how ignorant I am of those issues, though, and the complexity of it, and how I should probably know more about kind of foreign affairs and international development and international politics. So it just kind of reveals my ignorance, I think, a wee bit over this. But it does always seem to come back to, it's exactly what we're talking about, doesn't it? It always seems to just come back to, because that's the thing, it's like follow the money or follow the resources. What is it they're looking for here? you know, and Ukraine's history as well is quite a complex one, and you know, this political kind of posturing against Ukraine, obviously kind of who used to be part of the Soviet Union, and you know, and kind of declared their independence and so forth. So you've got quite a complex history there too. It's I mean, there's a wee bit of a kind of, I don't know, it's that kind of process of stomping again.
Yeah, I do know that when it comes to Russia, I'm quite, I can be quite ignorant as well when it comes to some certain international political, you know, news stories. And when it comes to Putin, I just tend to go, oh, he's at it again, and just flick through, which is wrong. I should really read it and pay more attention. But I just think, yeah, what's he up to now? That's.
I mean, it's interesting because I'd be curious to see how Donald Trump would have managed this, and how much more melodramatic the whole thing could have become.
He probably, I don't think he would have sent in any warships. He probably would have sat back, probably, and just.
Well, he would have made it all about him.
Oh yeah, yeah. It would have been spun to do. Yeah. Or they're not involving me. I wasn't invited to their dinner last night. You know. Yeah. It would have been so. Yeah. Oh right, Linda's telling me Russia's been sending missiles to the border. So there we go. A bit of sense.
The Ukraine border, I'm assuming.
Sorry, Siobhan?
I'm assuming she means the Ukrainian border. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you know, I mean, if I was Ukraine, I would be slightly worried, actually. Yes, for sure. Yeah. Definitely.
But again, it's Russia again, just being the bully boy tactics is once again, as Putin's very good at.
And you do wonder how much is the bravado rather than the actual act, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. Right, now on to our next story, heading over to America. The pathologist tells jury that arrest videos undercut Derek Chauvin's trial defence. In the testimony today, a forensic pathologist said that the sheer volume of videos of George Floyd's arrest helped confirm the finding that oxygen deprivation caused his death, not an opioid overdose, as argued by the lawyers for the former Minneapolis. I need to take a glass of water. Hold on a wee minute. Minneapolis officer on trial for his murder. Dr. Lindsay said she agreed with the findings of the Hennepin County medical examiner, who ruled Floyd's death was a homicide caused by the way Derek Chauvin had and other officers pinned him to the ground on May the 25th, 2020. Chauvin, who is white, was recorded in multiple videos kneeling for more than 9 minutes on the neck of Floyd as the 46-year-old black man in handcuffs begged for his life in a fading voice. The arrest sparked global protests against police brutality. Siobhan, I don't know if you've been keeping up to date with the trial, but I've kind of been watching it every now and again, and some of the videos are just horrific, showing people, you know, standing round about, you know, asking officers to give them George Floyd medical attention and being refused. And it's just to think in this day and age, and I know it's America, not the UK, but even just in America this day and age, that such brutality was used when there was obviously no need for it, according when you see the footage of George Floyd. What's your take on what's going on at the trial? Have you seen any of it at all, or watched any of it, kept up to date?
Not massively, but I mean, I think it's the whole George Floyd thing. I'm not surprised that it kicked off a whole host of protests and so on. And I keep thinking of the rapper Akala's comments about dehumanization, and it's that kind of, when you begin to dehumanize a group of people, it becomes a mandate for murder. And what you've got in the history of America is centuries of dehumanization of the Black American population that leads to a justification in law. And this is what the defense is. It wasn't us standing on his neck for 9 minutes. It was the fact that he was a drug user that caused his death. And so you've got that defense, which is, it's not our fault, it's his fault. And it's interesting that the videos have been so important as a part of the defence. I think that's thank God, thank God that people had almost the sense to video this as witness evidence, because otherwise, what was the situation that we could have had? You had people begging the police, like you say, begging the police to help him, to get off his neck and so forth, but they continued anyway. That is a kind of dehumanization of a very, very brutal kind, and the fact that it was so public and so videoed on social media, I'm not surprised that it caused so much upset and so much anger, because you have got to reach a point where enough is enough. And there is that. It's an interesting, because if you look at the kind of social media defence, as you like, of the police, it usually becomes an attack against George Floyd. He was this, he was that, he was this, he was this. All this kind of problems with his characters. And if you look at the parallels, it's very similar to a female victim in a rape trial. Well, she did this, she wore this, she did this, she did that. It's victim blaming, because it's basically a way to dehumanize the victim and justify a state brutality. And that's what it was. It was a state brutality. Who knows what's going to happen with this trial? I mean, it looks like the evidence and the videos which helped that has certainly established that it was police action, but it was one of those common sense things that everybody knew that's what caused it. Everybody watching that horrific footage knew that's what the case was. The fact that there's an argument over that, I think, really kind of tells you where that kind of race relations are at. It wasn't our fault. It wasn't the systematic white supremacist, century-old anti-racist dehumanization. It was his fault. It was his fault that we killed. And that's basically the defence that you're kind of working on at the moment. It's quite horrific, and it really, I think, exemplifies and is very symptomatic of the problems and the complexities of the kind of race relations that America has at the moment, because it's just generation after generation of Black communities being dehumanized and suppressed across the board. And I keep coming back to Trump, but the damage that Trump did in terms of those race relations really, really caused that problem. And Biden is now having to kind of pick up that mess, as you were. I mean, I hope that the community and the families and we talked at the start about Prince Philip, and it's a sad situation, but here was a young man, regardless of what his past was, regardless of what he was doing, he didn't deserve that brutal death. And I hope at the very least the family receives some kind of closure from this trial. And I hope against all odds that Biden begins to start repairing the damage that's been done, not just over the last 4 years, but over centuries. And we have, the first kind of ethnic minority female vice president, and hopefully she'll make some way forward to building that as well. But there's a long, long way to go in order to redress the inequalities and the race inequalities that occurs within America, and that has occurred in America for centuries.
Yeah, definitely, Siobhan. I think there's a lot of bridges to be built between the authorities and the communities over in America, especially with the police department. and the ethnic communities, because they have let a lot of people down. They really have.
Yeah.
And as you say, it doesn't matter what George Floyd's character was. At the end of the day, he was a human being, and he did not deserve to be restrained by the means that was used. They were totally
He deserved due
unnecessary.
process the same as every other person, and it really does go back to the Jim Crow legislation and so forth. The slavery is that, you know, if this kind of thing is allowed, then what's the need for law? You know, it just means that anybody can do what they want. So there really is. Can you imagine how scary it would be being a young black man in America? Being stopped by the police. The police are there to protect you, but they're basically now they are an organisation that's not just with this incident. It's incident after incident after incident after. This is systematic, systematic brutality and violence against kind of the black communities. It's terrifying. It's a terrifying situation to be in.
It is. It's unthinkable. It is unthinkable. And the thing is, what's happened is the police have become judge and jury themselves in deciding who's guilty. And regarding police officers around the world, they have a duty of care to people, everybody, and that includes criminals as well. They have a duty of care to keep them, as much as we all might get emotionally involved in against certain criminals and things, they have a duty of care to keep them safe. So they reach a trial and they go to court, and then they are judged by their peers, and this is where that has failed. It doesn't matter what George Floyd's character was. At the end of the day, there was a duty of care which was failed to be reached, and it's quite a sad case.
I think that, you know, it's reminded me of there was a study just about 2 or 3 years ago of young American trainee doctors and the racial stereotypes that still prevailed within the medical profession for the black community. And so the kind of common stereotypes, which I think it tells you maybe where the kind of the American histories come from through this, is the common stereotypes was that black people had thicker skin. And also connected to that, they felt or they tolerated pain much better than their white counterparts. Now, if you think of, you know, if you date back that stereotype to slavery, you can see exactly where that stereotype come from. And it comes from the basis of, well, we can treat them more brutally because, you know, it's a justification for treating the black communities more brutally. They feel less pain, they are less human, they're less than us, you know. They've got thicker skin, so therefore we can beat them harder. And that's where this is the brutal reality of these kind of stereotypes that still exist to this day in very subtle ways. You know, I'm not saying that the medical profession are in any way trying to kind of brutalize people, but these stereotypes that are centuries old and based, embedded in a white violence against the black communities, and from slavery onwards, it still exists in very subtle forms today, and it still exists within our medicine as well. So this kind of notion that, you know, we could do more violence to black people and they will feel less. Now, think about the consequences of that kind of stereotype there. It allows a more brutalization. It's quite. I mean, it's quite. I want to say fascinating, but it's horrible to say fascinating because it's not. It's brutal, you know.
Yeah, I'm speechless. I'm absolutely speechless because to think that people still think like that in this day and age. But but it is still there, and that's the sad, terrifying fact. It's still there,
and it's not a blaming of the doctors. It's just the cultural inheritance of that type of stereotype.
Yeah, and I have no words. It's just, you know, that people still think like that, and but unfortunately, it's still there in society, especially in America, and thankfully, it's not as prominent here. You still get the odd person here that has got some strange beliefs about, different races and things like that. And, but thankfully it doesn't seem to have the same kind of foothold here. Or maybe that's me being naive.
I mean, I think that America is quite an exception there because of their kind of really brutal racial history. But I think that the stereotypes still remain within the medical profession here. There might be slightly different ones, but certainly in psychiatry, there's still those kind of stereotypes that the psychiatric profession still work by. It's because it's embedded and it's structural.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it gets passed down, doesn't it? It gets passed down from teacher to pupil.
Yeah, as assumed knowledge.
That's what happens.
Yeah.
Right, now to move on to our next story, sticking with the US. Biden's first budget marks sharp change from Trump years. The US President, Joe Biden, has asked Congress to sharply increase spending to combat climate change and gun violence in a budget that marks a sharp departure from his predecessor, Donald Trump. The $1.5 trillion budget, reflecting an 8% increase in base funding from the current year, would invest billions more in public transportation and environmental cleanups, slash funding on a border wall, and expand funding for background checks on gun sales, each goal clashing with the prior administration. Nearly 3 months into a job consumed by the fight against the COVID-19 pandemic, the document offered a long-awaited glimpse into Biden's agenda and kickstarts a grueling negotiation with Congress over what will ultimately be funded. Biden would increase spending by $14 billion across agencies to deal with the effects of greenhouse gas emissions, a shift from the Trump administration's dismal of climate science. The president would spend millions on dealing with the rising numbers of unaccompanied children showing up in the country's southern border from Central America, including $861 million to invest in that region, but that his budget would provide no funding for the construction of a border wall, a signature Trump priority, and would increase funding for the investigation of immigration agents accused of white supremacy. Among the biggest proposed increases in funding are for schools in poorer neighbourhoods, and on researching deadly diseases other than COVID-19 pandemic that has dominated his term in office so far. Now, Siobhan, reading this here, it seems quite a positive budget, a way forward rather than a way back.
Definitely.
I can see you smiling there. You're going to go,
it's a good news story, isn't it? Yeah.
It's a good news story. And the fact,
walls out.
The border wall. I wonder if that's going to be knocked down. So, yeah. So,
I hope I see a big image of Biden just smashing it down. Yes. I mean, it's interesting. Yes, exactly. We got so close to the abyss, I think, in an American way, but also internationally as well, with Donald Trump. And this budget for me feels like Biden's definitely pulling it back. And it's interesting that we were talking just there about kind of the complex and brutal race relations. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that he's investing in is the investigation of white supremacist attitudes and actions amongst the immigration officers. Because you can imagine the vulnerability of the people coming across the border to be met with a white supremacist, institutionally racist organisation. So yes, so that's great news. The other thing that kind of touched my heart was the investment of schools in the poorer children, and there's echoes of the SNP bold plan. I think here, as we move forward in the post-COVID recovery, he seems to be prioritising the vulnerable. prioritising, the children in the poorer communities, prioritising the planet, which, is pretty vulnerable at the moment, prioritising vulnerable children coming across the border and protecting them through the investigation of the white supremacy within the immigration officers as well. So there is that kind of shift in alliances and shift in our priorities. And I think the SNP is bolder. I have to say, there's a lot more projects that the SNP has, but I think that the SNP have had plenty of time and power to kind of begin to build this and up. But for a first budget, I think it's good, and it absolutely wipes clean the Trumpian culture and process that he set up. It is really a case of just trying to redress the damage that was done, but this is a good start for me, and I hope that he can get most of this through. It looks like he can, but yeah, it's good news. Protection of the planet, protection of vulnerable children, in all areas. It's better than building a wall. Put it that way.
Yes, I mean the building of the wall still gets me to what that was meant to achieve, because it wasn't going to achieve anything really. It was basically a red herring. But no, and it's good to see that the money is going to things that, especially the schools and the vulnerable. And that's what societies should be doing. Rich societies should be looking after the most vulnerable. What about the funding, expanding background checks on gun sales? Now, I'm a bit naive here regarding America and their gun sales. I would imagine they would have had to have been vigorous background checks to start with, but obviously chances are, going by a lot of the news reports that come out, that doesn't happen. So to see expanding the background checks, do you think that will make a difference in the gun violence in America, or do you think that's just going to push it more underground?
I mean, the gun situation is very complex, isn't it? And the gun lobby is quite powerful. So to enter into that foray is perhaps a kind of quite a brave thing to do for a first budget. But I think that maybe it is the time, in terms of thinking about a post-COVID recovery, it's a time again to start thinking about what our priorities are. And it's I mean, it's, we have to go through like our dozens and dozens, in my case hundreds probably, hours of driving lessons in order to kind of drive a car safely, yet you could walk in and get a gun. It seems utterly bizarre. The kind of priorities are so wrong. So there is a good step there. It's always a hard one, because these gun things become extraordinarily controversial, and it's often a case where the right really push, and have lots of power behind them as well. So let's see how that one works out for them.
Yeah, well, I'm being told that he's going to use the executive orders to push that through. But again, he's been very brave, because the gun lobbyists are very powerful, and they will have a lot to say regarding any changes to the gun laws. Now, moving on to our last story of the evening. Greta Thunberg says she will not attend COP26 climate summit. The Swedish climate campaigner Greta Thunberg has said she will not attend the COP26 climate summit in Glasgow in November, saying the uneven distribution of COVID-19 vaccines would mean countries could not participate on even terms. The 18-year-old activist said that by November, richer countries would be vaccinating young, healthy people, very often at the expense of people in at-risk groups in other parts of the world. Confirming a BBC report, Thunberg said the conference should be postponed if everyone could not attend in the same terms. The conference has already been postponed once, as it was originally planned for November 2020. However, the campaigner said she did not rule out reversing her decision if vaccine access improved. Thunberg, who began campaigning against climate emergency in 2018 at the age of 15, has earned Amnesty International's top human rights prize and the Swedish Right Livelihood Award. And in 2019, she was named the Person of the Year by Time magazine. Now, Siobhan, do you think Greta is being correct in saying about not attending the COP26 and that not all countries would be able to participate on even terms regards to the vaccine? I'm surmising what is meant by that is you're going to have the rich countries being able to get everybody vaccinated, and then you've got the third world, poorer countries who are not going to have the same access to the vaccines that we've had, and they're not going to have a voice at the summit.
So, I mean, here is an interesting statistic, and I think Greta Thunberg is pretty much word for word quoted the World Health Organization, who made a statement just a day or so ago. If you think about all the vaccines that's occurred in the world, and this is from the WHO, only 0.1% of doses administered worldwide have been administered in low-income countries, while the high-income countries account for more than half of all the doses injected. So you can immediately see there is a massive inequality in terms of globally, in terms of the vaccination programme, which we knew was going to happen. And what you've got here, and I think she really has a point, and good for her for using her voice to draw attention to that massive inequality. Because what you've actually got here is, you were talking about the COP22 and we're talking about how to deal with the global climate crisis, okay? Yeah. Most of the poorer countries that will not manage because of the vaccination problem are likely to be some of the countries that will be subject to the problems of the global climate change, and they already are as well, because it's the poorer countries globally that are beginning to be affected. So you have this kind of dual kind of process here where they're excluded on many different levels. So the vaccine is a massive, well, COVID itself it throws up massive inequalities. You know, even within Scotland or Great Britain, if you like, it's the poorer communities, the BAME communities that have lower vaccination, but also more likely to get it because of the jobs and the roles that they have within society. It's harder to isolate, it's harder to work from home and so on. So there's inequalities within a country level, but there's also massive inequalities on a global level as well. So we really have this kind of dual process here where they're going to be excluded because of the COVID and the vaccine issue, but they're going to be spectators in their own, you know, being victims to the global climate crisis. So there is that massive irony here where the kind of richer countries who are discussing the global climate crisis, by the way, most of the richer countries are to blame for the global climate crisis because of kind of the massive kind of, you know, the massive kind of production that we've had over the kind of course of the last kind of couple of centuries. And then the countries that are going to be subjected to the problems of climate change are just sitting, being spectators in the whole process. So there is something deeply unequal about that. I understand the urgency of the COP22 and the fact that it had to be delayed, but there has to be ways of including everyone, and actually that starts with equalising the vaccine across the globe. I do feel slightly uncomfortable, even within Scotland, that are younger folk, and we're beginning to talk about our younger folk. And it's great to see a country that's maybe kind of getting back on their feet, but if it's at the expense of more vulnerable people in other countries, is there moral justification for that? You know, I'm shielding, so, you know, glad I've got the vaccine and so forth. But if you think about kind of the millions of people across the globe that are shielding and still struggling to get a vaccine, and how scary that must feel and how difficult that must be, then there has to be some equality. And here's the big thing, I think, for me, is that we will all benefit when everybody's vaccinated. We can't just scoop up the vaccine and go, we're all right, because the vaccine doesn't work like that, because it travels across the board, you know. So we all benefit when everyone's vaccinated. So it's in all our interests to vaccinate the poorer communities just as much as it is to vaccinate the richer interests. And that's the big the big takeaway, really, isn't it? That we should be
It
having
is.
from COVID is that we all benefit when we're all safe.
Yeah, definitely, Siobhan, and I agree with that totally. Because at the end of the day, the virus could mutate if not everybody is vaccinated. Well, thank you, Siobhan, for joining me this evening. It's been an absolute pleasure as always,
You too.
And I look forward to speaking to you again. And thank you to you for watching me this evening. Once again, filming from the comfort of my own home. If you would like to get involved, we are always asking for more volunteers. We're always asking for people to get involved and subscribe. If you would like to subscribe to Broadcasting Scotland so we can carry on providing these programmes, the details are on the screen just below me. If I can get this right here, there we go. And also, as well, as I say, we are looking for volunteers, but we're also looking to raise funds to provide people with paid jobs here at Broadcasting Scotland, which is very important to us. But if you want to volunteer, contact us. The details were just on the screen there. I just went off cue there. We are always looking for people to get involved in the technical side, behind the scenes, or journalists, or even sitting here in front of the camera, if you all remember. It's good fun, and the end of the day, we do enjoy it, and also as well, we're all sending best wishes to Gordon. We are missing him, and we hope he is back soon. Sitting in the hot seat doing interviews, but I'm doing my best, Gordon. I'm doing my best. But in the meantime, take care, and thank you for tuning in.
What distinguishes Broadcasting Scotland from a website or blog, apart from our brilliant programmes,
Hi there, I'm Gordon Ross.
are the costs we face to enable us to produce those programmes. These costs are significant and ongoing. However, our facilities are able to do so much more if only we had the staff. In the last year, some of our supporters have cancelled their subscriptions. In one way, we would prefer it if it was because they didn't like us, rather than it being because of the financial pressures which we are all under because of COVID. The really positive outcome of our fundraiser is that at a time of economic challenge in Scotland, we will use your donations to create jobs and in a small way contribute to improving the Scottish economy. If you want us to be Scotland's independent broadcaster, able to provide an alternative mainstream television platform, then please support us.
Scotland is going to be an independent country.
Just imagine what we could do if we had even 1% of the BBC Scotland channel's budget. Imagine. And then please consider turning your imagination into reality. Please support us if you can afford it.